Now, through the midst of the Copa America final, the Euro final, Xerxes officially signed with Manchester United, all of that big news in the footballing world, you would be forgiven for not thinking much or even hearing much about Aston Villa making their 7th official signing of the summer, even though this one is technically not official yet, but it's as good as official. But by making their 7th signing of the summer by signing Amadou Onana from Everton for what is a reported £50 million price tag. And like with the Ian Martin signing of Aston Villa, I quite like the signing by Villa. Although the price tag is reasonably steep, I like this move a lot, especially with the recent sale of Douglas Luiz. I think Onana could be a really effective player in Villa's midfield, and I also think he could add a new dynamic, and I think Onana will just be an overall game wrecker for Aston Villa in their midfield that could help them out massively in this big season for them, where they will be playing in the Champions League after finishing 4th last season under Unai Emery. But why do I think this? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Back of the Net here. I hope you're all doing well. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. Now, the last video I made covering Aston Villa was about the signing of Ian Martin from Chelsea and why I thought this was a steal and some really good business by the Villains. I think Martin is a very high level defender, and for the price tag they got him for, I really like this deal as a whole. But since then, Aston Villa have still been extremely busy in the transfer window, arguably one of, if not the busiest teams so far across Europe. Between sending Coutinho out on loan to Brazil, seeing Callum Chambers leave on a free to Cardiff, between the sales of Morgan Sanson and Tim Iroegbunam for a combined €14 million, and the huge sales of Douglas Luiz to Juventus for €51.5 million, they have been very busy on the outgoing front, and then on the incomings they have been arguably busier. Obviously signing the aforementioned Ian Martin, signing 22-year-old Cameron Archer for €16 million, signing 20-year-old Illing Jr. from Juventus for €14 million, signing 21-year-old Lewis Dobbin from Everton for €11 million, signing 23-year-old Barranquilla from Juventus for €8 million, and signing Ross Barkley from Luton Town for just €6 million. Aston Villa are seemingly desperate to improve their team, and they want to do it soon with the Champions League and the Premier League on the horizon for Emery and his men. And the signing of Amadou Onana fits Aston Villa perfectly. Now, I was pretty surprised to see how sudden it got reported and how quick the deal got done between Everton and Aston Villa. There were basically no rumours that I was aware of about Amadou Onana being a possible signing for Villa, and then out of the blue, Villa submitted the £50 million proposal, and it was a here we go from Fabrizio Romano. And I love this move for Aston Villa. Now, like I said, I do think £50 million is a tad bit steep, but when you consider it all, maybe it actually isn't all that bad. First of all, both Arsenal and Bayern Munich were heavily interested in the 22-year-old, almost 23 now, and you'd imagine that if Onana had the opportunity, if every one of those teams put a contract down, so he had an option between Arsenal, Bayern Munich and Aston Villa, well then it would have been a lot harder for Aston Villa to secure the signing of Amadou Onana. So that forced Aston Villa to be as rapid as possible in the negotiations with Amadou Onana, while also making an offer to Everton that can't be turned down to avoid any sort of bidding war. So maybe £50 million when you consider all of that isn't actually all that bad, and quite frankly, Onana is definitely a player that can live up to that kind of price tag. Now, when you include the sale of Douglas Luiz into the mix, then you can surely understand why I like this deal so much. Douglas Luiz is still the better player between him and Amadou Onana for me, but he's not light years better. Amadou Onana is 3 years younger and is a better defensive midfielder than Douglas Luiz. Now, Onana's passing is good. Nothing special and not nearly as good as Douglas Luiz in that area. But he's not a liability on the ball, and he is still a very capable passer, especially at the Premier League level. In the dribbling department, Onana again is good but not great. He doesn't often lose the ball, which says a lot, being that he was in an Everton team that was, yes, defensively amazing last season, but that Everton team couldn't score goals and couldn't attack well to save their lives. So for Onana to have some good stats on the ball in an Everton team like that, well, that's pretty impressive. But again, he's not better on the ball in any area than Douglas Luiz. I think Douglas Luiz is elite on the ball, really good passing, very good dribbling, but that doesn't mean that Onana is necessarily bad on the ball at all. On the defensive end though is where Onana for me shows his class. Onana is a defensive powerhouse, able to provide so much defensive stability in the middle of the park, while protecting the back four behind him, as well as being very good at stopping counterattacks from the other team. Onana is also exceptional in both ground and aerial duels, and he has a knack for intercepting the ball to quite a high level. He does still have some defensive weaknesses, as does every player around world football. Onana at times can get too aggressive, costing his team cheap unnecessary fouls, and Onana at times can get beat by a good dribbler. But outside of that, Onana on the defensive end of the ball is an absolute force that, in my opinion, is an upgrade on Douglas Luiz in that area. And although Onana is decent on the ball, I think on the defensive end is where he separates himself from the rest of the midfielders, and he shows why he is a £50 million player, being an absolute game breaker at times for Everton. Onana makes it very difficult for opposition teams to carve out Everton through the middle, and Onana playing under a defensive coach like Dyche for these past 2 seasons, as well as being 6'4", you can see why he has kept improving on the defensive end of the ball. When you look at Onana, he has all the physical tools to keep on improving on the defensive end, and maybe even eventually become a really good player on the ball and become borderline elite on the ball, as well as being a game wrecker on the defensive side of the ball. And this is why I think Onana is a perfect fit for Villa. He suits the profile of what type of player Villa have been signing in the window, with all of their signings outside of Ross Barkley being 23 years or younger. Onana will sit in the heart of the midfield in front of the back four to allow guys like John McGinn, Ross Barkley, Tielemans, and even new signing Berenkia to be more attacking and have to worry slightly less on the defensive end of the ball. Aston Villa also conceded 61 goals last season, the same as Fulham, and more than teams like Manchester United, Crystal Palace, and Everton, all of which finished below Villa. So this signing of Onana should also make Villa's defense even tighter and perform better as a unit. I know £50 million is a lot, but for a guy you've signed that both Arsenal and Bayern Munich were interested in, plus him being 22, almost 23, and being the game wrecker that he is, having the high ceiling that he does, I love this deal for Aston Villa, and to be honest, Aston Villa are absolutely cooking so far in this transfer window.